I am a Jewish lawyer, and I never believed in afterlife experiences until I died for 8 minutes and received a direct warning from Jesus Christ, specifically for the Supreme Court justices. My name is David Goldstein, and for 30 years, I built what everyone would call a successful career at one of Manhattan's most prestigious law firms, with a reputation for winning impossible cases that other attorneys wouldn't even touch. But what happened to me on October 15th, 2024 was more real than any courtroom victory and changed my life forever. What I experienced during those 8 minutes was something my analytical legal mind could never have conceived. A face-to-face encounter with Jesus Christ, who delivered an urgent, specific warning for the Supreme Court justices. This isn't just another near-death experience story. What I'm about to share with you will challenge everything you believe about law, justice, and divine authority in ways that no legal precedent ever could. Let me tell you exactly what happened during those 8 minutes beyond life, and why this message is more urgent than any case currently before our highest court. I was raised in a conservative Jewish household in Brooklyn. My father was a rabbi, and my mother taught Hebrew school. I went through all the traditions, had my bar mitzvah, and studied Torah extensively in my youth. But as I got older, especially through law school and into my career, I found myself drifting further from my faith, not because I stopped believing in God entirely, but because I became consumed with success, money, and the intoxicating power that comes with being a skilled attorney. Think of it like this. Imagine a river slowly changing course over decades. That's what happened to my spiritual life. What started as a rushing stream of faith became a trickle, then barely a memory of where the water once flowed. By 2024, I was spiritually empty. I attended synagogue maybe 3 times a year, mostly to appease my aging parents. My relationship with God had become purely transactional. When I won a big case, I'd offer a quick thank you to the universe. When things went wrong, I'd curse whatever divine forces might exist. I was the epitome of a cultural Jew who had abandoned the spiritual foundation of my heritage. Now, what happened next will completely change how you see life and death forever. Stay with me because this gets incredible. Then everything changed on the morning of October 15th. What started as an ordinary day would become the most extraordinary experience of my life. I was preparing for a major Supreme Court case that I'd been working on for 2 years, a religious freedom case involving the rights of faith-based institutions. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, a spiritually empty Jewish lawyer representing a Christian organization while feeling completely cynical about their faith. I saw it purely as a legal challenge, not understanding that God was already positioning me for what was about to happen. I was in my office around 9 a.m. reviewing my arguments when I suddenly felt a crushing pain in my chest. The room started spinning and I could barely breathe. The last thing I remember thinking was, "This can't be happening. I have too much work to do." Have you ever noticed how the most profound moments come when we're completely unprepared for them? I had built my entire identity around control, logic, and legal precedent. But death doesn't care about your court schedule. What I'm about to tell you defies every law of physics, every medical explanation, every logical framework I had built my entire career on. But it was more real than anything I had ever experienced in my physical life. Then everything changed in an instant, and what happened next would shatter every assumption I had about life, death, and divine reality. The paramedics later told me that I flatlined for exactly 8 minutes and 23 seconds. But those weren't just 8 minutes of unconsciousness. Those 8 minutes became my gateway into eternity, where I received a message that would change not just my life, but potentially the spiritual future of our nation. I found myself standing in what I can only describe as complete darkness, but it wasn't frightening. It was peaceful, like being wrapped in the most comfortable silence I'd ever experienced. Then I saw a point of light in the distance, growing larger and brighter as I moved toward it. But I wasn't walking, I was gliding, as if the very fabric of that space was carrying me forward. As I approached the light, it expanded into what looked like a tunnel, but made of pure, golden radiance. The walls seemed alive, pulsing with energy that I could feel in every part of my being. I could hear music, but not any music I'd ever heard. On Earth, it was like every beautiful sound that had ever existed was harmonizing in perfect unity. The light was warm, but not in a temperature sense. It warmed my soul in a way I didn't even know was possible. You know that feeling when you come home after being away for months and everything feels exactly right? This was that feeling, but magnified beyond anything earthly comfort could offer. Are you ready for this? Because what I witnessed in that moment will challenge everything you think you know about reality itself. What I encountered at the end of that tunnel defied not just everything I believed, but everything I thought was possible. I emerged into a landscape so magnificent that my mind still struggles to process it. It was like the most beautiful place on earth, but magnified beyond human comprehension. There were colors that don't exist in our world, and the very air seemed to shimmer with life and love. I could see vast meadows stretching to horizons that seemed infinite, with what looked like crystal rivers running through them. But I wasn't there to admire the scenery. Standing before me was a figure that I knew immediately, without any introduction, was Jesus Christ. Now, you have to understand the profound complexity of this moment for me. Here I was, a Jewish man, raised in the tradition that viewed Jesus as, at best, a misunderstood teacher, and at worst, the symbol of centuries of persecution against my people. Every theological barrier, every cultural wall, every intellectual argument I had ever constructed should have created resistance in this moment. Imagine a courtroom where all the legal precedents you've studied suddenly become irrelevant because you're standing before the ultimate judge. That's what this felt like. Every religious debate I'd ever heard seemed like whispered arguments in the face of this overwhelming presence. But what he told me next will shake the very foundations of our legal system. Listen carefully to every word. Yet none of that mattered. Standing before this divine presence, I felt no conflict, no theological confusion, no cultural resistance. I felt only love, pure, unconditional, overwhelming love that dissolved every barrier I had ever constructed between myself and divine truth. Jesus was tall, with kind eyes that seemed to contain all of history and all of compassion. His hair was dark brown, slightly wavy, and his skin had a golden glow that seemed to emanate from within. He wore a simple white robe, but it wasn't the European artistic depictions I'd seen. This was clearly a Jewish man, my brother in heritage, and that recognition brought me profound comfort. He smiled at me and said, "David, my child, you've been far from home for too long." His voice was like nothing I can adequately describe. It was gentle but powerful, familiar yet divine. When he spoke, I didn't just hear the words, I felt them resonate in every cell of my being. "I know this is difficult for you to understand," he continued, "given your religious upbringing and the walls that have been built between faiths. But I'm not the possession of any one religion. I am love itself, and you have always been my beloved son, even when you forgot who you were. I wanted to speak, to ask 1,000 questions, but I found that my thoughts were being heard without words." He responded to my confusion with infinite patience. "You are here for a reason, David. Not just for your own spiritual awakening, but because I have a message that must be delivered. You are going to return to your life, and you must share what you are about to see and hear." Then he showed me something that would become the core of my mission. The reason I was sent back to share this warning with you. What you're about to hear is the most important message any Supreme Court justice or anyone in authority will ever receive. This vision will change everything you understand about justice, law, and divine accountability. The peaceful landscape around us shifted, and I felt the very fabric of reality bend and transform around us. Suddenly, we were standing in what I immediately recognized as the Supreme Court chamber. But this wasn't the earthly courtroom I knew so well from my legal career. The walls seemed to breathe with an ancient energy, and the very air hummed with the weight of eternal decisions. What I saw next was beyond anything my legal mind could have imagined. The 9 justices sat at their bench, but they appeared to be surrounded by rivers of golden light that flowed and pulsed with each decision. Picture a spiritual EKG machine measuring the heart of justice itself. When they spoke words of wisdom rooted in divine truth, the light blazed brighter, sending waves of warmth that I could feel in my very soul. But when political calculation or personal bias influenced their reasoning, the light dimmed to a cold, almost sickly glow that made me shiver with spiritual dread. I could actually see the ripples of each decision spreading out like waves across time and eternity, touching millions of souls I would never meet. Jesus gestured toward the scene with a movement so graceful it seemed like music made visible. His voice carried the weight of eternity as he said, "Look carefully, David. Every decision made in that chamber affects not just the law of the land, but the spiritual trajectory of millions of souls. The justices believe they are interpreting human law, but they are participating in a cosmic battle between light and darkness, love and fear, truth and deception." Think about this for a moment. Every legal decision you've ever witnessed, every law that's been passed, every judgment rendered, all of it carries eternal weight. Are you beginning to understand the magnitude of what I'm telling you? Then, he showed me something that changed everything I thought I knew about the law. I watched specific cases unfold, but not as legal proceedings, as spiritual warfare. Think of legal decisions like stones thrown into a cosmic pond. Every ruling creates ripples that spread far beyond the immediate case. When I saw a religious freedom case where the decision restricted faith, I witnessed actual darkness spreading like black ink through water, seeping into homes, schools, and hearts across the nation. Children lost their innocence, families fractured, communities turned cold. But when I witnessed civil rights cases rooted in true divine justice, waves of brilliant light erupted from the Supreme Court chamber like a dam bursting, flowing across the land and literally healing the broken places in people's souls. I saw historical wounds close. I saw generations of pain transform into hope, and in the cases about life and death, I saw the actual eternal destinations of souls shifting like constellations rearranging in the heavens. The problem, Jesus continued, and his voice carried a sadness that seemed to echo through eternity, is that most of the justices have forgotten that human law must align with divine law to produce true justice. They have been trained to separate their spiritual understanding from their judicial reasoning, but this separation is an illusion. Every law, every judicial decision, every legal argument is ultimately a spiritual matter because it affects the souls I died to save. Then he showed me something that shattered my heart completely. But here's where it gets personal, and this next part changed everything I thought I knew about my own life's purpose. I saw myself, David Goldstein, the successful Manhattan lawyer, in my own legal practice, but I was seeing it through divine eyes. I watched as my younger self argued cases purely for winning, for money, for the rush of professional victory. With each selfish argument I made, with each time I twisted truth for tactical advantage, I saw dark threads weaving themselves around my soul and around the lives of everyone affected by those cases. It was like watching a master craftsman use the finest tools to build something corrupt. I had used my God-given talents, my sharp mind, my persuasive abilities, my legal knowledge, not to serve justice, but to feed my own ego and bank account. I had participated in the very spiritual corruption I was now being called to expose. This revelation about my own failings made what Jesus showed me next even more profound. Does this resonate with you? Have you ever felt the weight of using your gifts for the wrong purposes? The weight of this realization was crushing, but Jesus' presence filled me with hope, even in my deepest shame. I'm not condemning you, my son, Jesus said, seeing my anguish. I am awakening you. You have been called to the legal profession for this moment. The Supreme Court is facing cases in 2025 that will determine the spiritual direction of this nation for generations. They need to hear this warning. He then revealed specific information about upcoming cases, particularly those involving religious freedom, the rights of faith-based institutions, and the relationship between church and state. I cannot share all the details publicly, as some involved cases that haven't been announced yet, but the core message was clear. The Supreme Court justices must remember that they are accountable not just to the Constitution, but to the one who created the moral foundations upon which all just law must rest. Tell them, Jesus commanded, that their decisions are being weighed in heavenly courts as well as earthly ones. Tell them that religious freedom is not just a constitutional right, but a divine imperative. Every human soul must be free to seek me, to worship me, to live according to their spiritual convictions, as long as those convictions align with love and truth. But the warning didn't stop with the Supreme Court. Jesus then revealed something even more profound, a vision that showed me why this message is so urgent for every American, not just those in positions of legal authority. What I witnessed about America's spiritual future will shock you. The battle between truth and deception is happening right now, and you're part of it whether you realize it or not. As the Supreme Court vision faded, the scene shifted like a cosmic curtain being pulled back, and I could see the broader spiritual landscape of our nation in 2025. What I witnessed was breathtaking and terrifying at the same time. I saw two great waves moving across the land, one of brilliant pure light and another of deceptive shifting shadows. Imagine standing on a mountaintop during a storm, watching two massive weather systems collide. That's what America's spiritual climate looks like from heaven's perspective. The wave of light represented a great awakening, millions of souls crying out for authentic divine relationship, hungry for truth that could satisfy their deepest longings. I could see people in every city, every small town, every forgotten and corner of America raising their hands toward heaven with tears streaming down their faces, desperate for something real. But the wave of shadows was equally powerful. I watched as religious and political leaders who had exchanged truth for power fed these hungry souls spiritual counterfeits, false promises, manipulative doctrines, political ideologies dressed up as divine revelation. These leaders stood on platforms of gold that were actually fool's gold, speaking words that sounded holy but carried the stench of spiritual death. The collision between these two waves was creating spiritual earthquakes across our nation. This is why you must speak, Jesus told me, and his eyes blazed with an urgency that seemed to set my very soul on fire. Not just to the Supreme Court, but to anyone who will listen. The institutional structures that claim to represent me, whether religious or secular, have often lost their way, but I am doing a new thing. As he spoke these words, I felt the ground beneath us tremble with divine power. The very air around us began to shimmer with golden particles of light that danced like living stars. I am calling individuals into direct relationship with me, he continued, unmediated by human institutions that have been corrupted by pride and politics. I am bypassing the gatekeepers. I am speaking directly to hearts that are humble enough to hear. to souls that are desperate enough to seek, to minds that are open enough to receive divine truth without human filtering. The implications of what I learned changed everything I thought I knew about law, justice, and spiritual authority. I realized that my entire career had been preparation for this moment, this message, this mission. I had been given knowledge of legal systems, understanding of constitutional law, and credibility in professional circles, not for personal success, but to be a bridge between divine truth and human justice. Jesus then addressed what I knew would be the most controversial aspect of my experience. You are Jewish, and you will remain Jewish. I did not come to destroy the law and the prophets, but to fulfill them. Your Jewish heritage is not an obstacle to our relationship, it is the foundation. I was Jewish, my disciples were Jewish, and the spiritual truths you will share are rooted in the same divine revelation your ancestors received. But I am calling you to recognize that the Messiah your people have been waiting for has already come, and that Messiah is not the property of any one religion, but the Savior of all who will receive divine love. This was perhaps the most difficult part of my experience to process. I'm not going to pretend that accepting Jesus as the Messiah didn't create theological tension for me. It did. But in that divine presence, theological arguments seemed irrelevant compared to the overwhelming reality of love, truth, and spiritual transformation I was experiencing. But here's what will amaze you. What Jesus revealed about the Jewish people and our role in the coming spiritual awakening changes everything. Seeing my struggle with this theological complexity, Jesus addressed what I knew would be my deepest concern. Your people, the Jewish people, are still my chosen people, Jesus assured me. But chosen for what? Chosen to be a light to the nations, to demonstrate that the divine and human can work together, to show the world what it looks like when legal and moral systems align with heavenly principles. You have been chosen not for privilege, but for responsibility, and that responsibility extends to the highest courts in the land. He then gave me specific instructions about what I needed to communicate to the Supreme Court justices and to the legal profession in general. The warning was not just about specific cases, but about the spiritual crisis facing the entire legal system. Tell them that human law without divine foundation becomes tyranny. Tell them that justice without love becomes cruelty. Tell them that decisions made from political calculation rather than moral truth create spiritual darkness that affects generations. Tell them that they have been given their positions not just by electoral processes or presidential appointments, but by divine providence, and they will be held accountable for how they use that authority. But the message wasn't just about accountability, it was also about hope and redemption. Jesus showed me how legal decisions made in alignment with divine truth could heal societal divisions, protect the vulnerable, and create conditions for spiritual awakening on a massive scale. The legal profession was meant to be a reflection of divine justice, he explained. When lawyers, judges, and legislators align their work with love, truth, and the protection of human dignity, they participate in my work of redemption. When they use legal systems for selfish gain, political power, or social control, they participate in the work of the adversary. In that moment, everything became clear. I understood why I had been chosen for this experience, why those 8 minutes of clinical death were actually the most vital moments of my existence, and why I was being sent back with this urgent message. Are you ready to discover what this means for your own life? Because the message I received isn't just for the Supreme Court, it's for every single person watching this video right now. The return to my physical body was like being slammed back into a prison cell after experiencing infinite freedom. I gasped so violently that I nearly sat up on the gurney, startling the paramedics who were still working to stabilize me. The first words that came out of my mouth, words I couldn't control, were, "I need to talk to the Supreme Court." One of the paramedics looked at his partner and said, "He's definitely got some brain fog from the oxygen deprivation." But inside, I had never been more clear-minded in my life. Have you ever tried to describe the ocean to someone who's only seen puddles? That's what it felt like trying to explain divine revelation to medical professionals. The spiritual clarity from those 8 minutes was still burning in my consciousness like a flame that refused to be extinguished. Everything looked different. The fluorescent hospital lights seemed harsh and artificial after the golden radiance I had experienced. The sounds of medical equipment felt jarring after the perfect harmony of heavenly music. Even the air tasted thin and lifeless compared to the atmosphere of divine presence I had breathed in that other realm. The physical recovery took several weeks, but the spiritual transformation was instantaneous and irreversible. My body healed, but my soul had been completely rewired. I couldn't walk into my old law firm without feeling spiritually nauseous. The marble floors that once impressed me seemed cold and lifeless. The expensive artwork that once made me feel successful now felt like hollow decorations hiding spiritual emptiness. Every case file on my desk carried a weight I had never felt before, the weight of eternal consequences. I remember sitting in my corner office one morning, looking out at the Manhattan skyline, and suddenly seeing it with spiritual eyes. I could see the prayers rising like incense from every building where people were crying out to God. I could also see the darkness hovering like smoke over places where spiritual deception was being packaged as success. I made the difficult decision to leave my prestigious law firm, giving up a 7-figure salary and partnership track, to start a practice focused on religious freedom cases. My former partners thought I had suffered permanent brain damage from the cardiac event. But I knew I had finally found my true calling. Every case became a spiritual battleground. When I represented a Christian baker who was being forced to violate his religious convictions, I wasn't just arguing constitutional law. I was defending the divine right of human souls to seek truth. When I took on a case involving a Jewish family's right to practice their faith without government interference, I was protecting the same spiritual freedom that had allowed me to encounter Jesus without abandoning my Jewish heritage. But the changes weren't limited to my career. My personal spiritual journey was equally transformed. Rather than abandoning my Jewish identity, I discovered what it truly means to be chosen by God. I learned that being chosen isn't about religious exclusivity, but about spiritual responsibility. I began studying both Torah and the New Testament, not as competing documents, but as progressive revelations of the same divine truth. I found that my Jewish understanding actually enhanced my comprehension of Jesus' message, and my encounter with Jesus deepened my appreciation for my Hebrew heritage. My family struggled with these changes initially. My parents were concerned that I was betraying our faith tradition. My colleagues thought I had suffered brain damage from oxygen deprivation. My friends couldn't understand why a successful lawyer would risk his reputation and income for religious causes. But I had seen eternity. I had stood in the presence of divine love. I had received a mission that transcended any earthly concern. Nothing else mattered compared to the urgency of the message I had been given. Over the past few months, I've been working to fulfill the specific instructions Jesus gave me. I've been writing to each Supreme Court justice individually, sharing my experience and the divine warning I received. I've been speaking at legal conferences about the spiritual dimensions of jurisprudence. I've been connecting with other lawyers and judges who have had similar spiritual awakenings. The response has been mixed. Some colleagues think I've lost my mind. Others have privately shared that they've been sensing a spiritual dimension to their work that they didn't know how to address. A few have told me about their own supernatural experiences that they had never felt safe sharing publicly. But I've also encountered something that chilled me to the bone, something Jesus had warned me about in that divine realm. I've discovered that there are actual spiritual forces working through human institutions to prevent this message from being heard. These aren't just people with different opinions or theological disagreements. These are individuals who have made conscious choices to serve spiritual darkness in exchange for earthly power. I've seen religious leaders who speak the language of faith, but whose eyes are dead, whose hearts are cold, whose ministries are built on manipulation rather than divine love. I've encountered political figures who invoke God's name while serving agendas that directly oppose divine truth. Most troubling of all, I've met legal professionals who use their knowledge of law not to serve justice, but to protect systems of oppression and spiritual deception. These people benefit from keeping divine truth separate from legal practice because it allows them to control both religious and political narratives for their own ends. Divine truth cannot be controlled by human institutions, but the message I received cuts through all of that. Divine love cannot be channeled exclusively through human gatekeepers. Divine justice cannot be limited to human interpretations. Now you understand why this warning burns in my spirit with such urgent intensity. I can feel the spiritual electricity building in the air like the moments before a massive storm breaks. We're not just facing another election year or another round of political debates. 2025 represents a pivotal moment in America's spiritual destiny, a crossroads that will determine the eternal trajectory of millions of souls. When I close my eyes, I can still see the vision Jesus showed me of two possible Americas emerging from the Supreme Court's decisions. In one future, I see children growing up free to seek divine truth, families worshiping without fear, communities built on authentic spiritual foundation. The light from that future is warm and golden, filled with hope and genuine peace. In the other future, I see spiritual oppression disguised as progressive policy, religious expression marginalized as dangerous extremism, and divine truth replaced by human ideology. The darkness in that future is suffocating, filled with souls, crying out for meaning, but finding only empty promises. The decisions made in the next few months will determine which future becomes reality. Let me ask you this: what role will you play in this cosmic battle? Because neutrality is not an option, and your choices matter more than you realize. The warning I received burns in my spirit every single day, because it wasn't just for the Supreme Court justices. It was for every single person who will hear these words. Whether you're a lawyer arguing cases that will affect thousands of lives, a judge making decisions that echo through generations, a legislator crafting laws that either protect or oppress human dignity, a law enforcement officer choosing between justice and corruption, or simply a citizen trying to navigate complex legal and political systems while maintaining your spiritual integrity. We all have a sacred responsibility to align our actions with divine truth. But here's what many people don't understand. This isn't about following religious rules or political ideologies. This is about recognizing that every choice we make either serves divine love or feeds spiritual darkness. So what does this divine warning mean for your daily life? How do you apply this revelation in practical ways? Let me share what I learned in the presence of divine truth. It means that every decision you make, whether you're voting in an election, advocating for positions in your community, supporting political candidates, or engaging in legal matters, must be measured against one critical question. Does this choice serve divine love, or does it serve human pride? Every legal decision creates spiritual ripples that extend across eternity. When we support policies that protect the vulnerable, we participate in divine compassion. When we advocate for truth, even when it's unpopular, we align ourselves with divine courage. When we choose justice over personal benefit, we reflect divine character. But when we make choices based on fear, prejudice, or selfish calculation, we participate in spiritual darkness, whether we realize it or not. The tax policy you support affects not just the economy, but the spiritual condition of a society's relationship with justice and compassion. It means understanding that religious freedom is not just about protecting the rights of organized religious institutions, but about defending every individual's right to seek divine truth, to live according to spiritual convictions, and to express faith without government interference. It means recognizing that human law must be grounded in divine law to produce true justice, but also understanding that divine law is ultimately about love, not legalistic control. Most importantly, it means acknowledging that we live in a time when many people are hungering for authentic spiritual experience, but the traditional structures they've relied on, both religious and secular, have often been corrupted by human pride and political calculation. Here's what will surprise you most. The solution isn't what you'd expect. What I discovered about breaking free from institutional control will completely shift your perspective. The solution is not to abandon these structures entirely, but to transform them by bringing divine truth into human institutions. This is what I believe Jesus meant when he showed me the vision of the Supreme Court operating in heavenly light. This is exactly why I was sent back from those 8 minutes of death. This is why I'm sharing this experience with you right now. This is why the warning I received must reach anyone who will listen, because the spiritual battle for America's future is happening now, and we all have a role to play. If you're in a position of legal authority, whether as a practicing attorney, a judge, or a law enforcement officer, I need you to hear this with your spirit, not just your mind. Your work has spiritual dimensions you may never have considered. Every time you step into a courtroom, every time you make a legal argument, every time you render a judgment or enforce a law, you are participating in a cosmic battle between good and evil, truth and deception, love and fear. The supernatural realm is watching. Divine justice is weighing your choices. Spiritual forces are being influenced by your decisions. When you defend the innocent, you participate in divine protection. When you expose corruption, you participate in divine truth. When you ensure fair process, regardless of a person's wealth or status, you participate in divine justice. When you show mercy to those who are genuinely repentant, you participate in divine love. But when you manipulate the law for personal gain, when you ignore evidence to serve political agendas, when you allow bias to influence your judgment, when you use your legal authority to oppress the vulnerable, you participate in spiritual darkness that extends far beyond the immediate case. The decisions you make don't just affect legal outcomes, they affect eternal destinies. If you're a citizen trying to navigate complex political and legal systems, you need to understand that your choices matter spiritually as well as practically. When you vote, when you advocate for causes, when you support or oppose legal positions, you are participating in spiritual warfare, whether you realize it or not. If you're struggling with questions about faith, about the relationship between different religious traditions, about whether divine truth can be known in a world full of competing claims, I want you to know that direct divine relationship is possible. You don't need institutional permission to seek God. You don't need theological credentials to experience divine love. You don't need to choose between your heritage and spiritual truth. What does this mean for you personally? How can you apply this divine wisdom to your own life? Let me share the practical steps that will change everything for you. The Jewish lawyer who died for 8 minutes and met Jesus is telling you that the barriers between divine truth and human experience are thinner than you think. The separation between spiritual reality and practical life is an illusion that serves the interests of those who want to control both your spiritual and political choices. The Supreme Court warning I received is ultimately a call to spiritual awakening for everyone who hears it. It's a reminder that we live in a time of extraordinary spiritual opportunity, but also extraordinary spiritual danger. The choices we make individually and collectively in the coming months and years will determine whether we move toward greater light or deeper darkness. I'm asking you to take this seriously, not because of my credentials as a lawyer, not because of my religious background, but because of the divine love and truth I encountered during those 8 minutes of death. What I experienced was more real than anything I had ever encountered. In my physical life, the warning I received was more urgent than any legal brief I'd ever written. So yes, I have delivered the warning that Jesus gave me for the Supreme Court justices. I have fulfilled the mission I was given during those 8 minutes of clinical death. But this message isn't just for them, it's for you, for everyone who understands that we live in times when divine truth must guide human decisions. Remember, love is the greatest force in the universe. This is the core truth that Jesus revealed to me, and it's the same truth that must guide every legal decision, every political choice, every moment of your life. Love is the force that moves the universe, and when we align ourselves with divine love, we participate in the redemption of our broken world. Share this message with others who need to hear it. Pray for wisdom for those in positions of authority. Seek direct divine relationship for yourself. Align your choices with love, truth, and justice. And remember that in the cosmic battle between light and darkness, neutrality is not an option. The Supreme Court justices need our prayers, not our political manipulation. The legal system needs our spiritual insight, not our cynical calculation. Our nation needs divine wisdom, not human cleverness. But I want to ask you directly, what does it mean that consciousness exists beyond the brain? What does it mean that a Jewish lawyer could die for 8 minutes and encounter Jesus Christ himself? What do you think happens after we leave this life? You now have what I promised you. The complete testimony of a Jewish lawyer who died for 8 minutes, met Jesus Christ, and received an urgent divine warning for our Supreme Court justices. You've witnessed the spiritual battle for America's future through heavenly eyes, and you understand that we all play a role in this cosmic drama between light and darkness. So I ask you directly, what will you do with this divine revelation? Will you be part of the awakening? Or will you remain a passive observer while the future of spiritual freedom hangs in the balance? These aren't just philosophical questions. They're the most practical questions you can ask, because how you answer them will determine how you live every day, how you make every decision, how you treat every person you encounter. But here's what I need you to understand. If you've felt a hunger for authentic spiritual experience, if you've sensed that the institutional structures around you, whether religious or political, have lost their way, then the message I received in that divine realm is specifically for you. Direct divine relationship is possible right now, for you. What does it mean that consciousness exists beyond the brain? What does it mean that a Jewish lawyer could die for 8 minutes and encounter Jesus Christ? What do you think happens after we leave this life? These questions aren't just intellectual curiosities. They're invitations to discover the same divine love I experienced in those 8 minutes of clinical death. Remember, love is the greatest force in the universe. This is the core truth that Jesus revealed to me. And it's the same truth that must guide every legal decision, every political choice, every moment of your life. Let that love guide your choices, your relationships, your work, your prayers. This is the warning I was sent back to deliver. This is the call to spiritual awakening for every soul who hears it. This is the urgent message from the one who holds all authority in heaven and earth, the same one who told me that human law without divine foundation becomes tyranny, that justice without love becomes cruelty, and that neutrality in the face of truth is still a choice for darkness over light. Share this message with everyone you know who needs to hear it. The Supreme Court justices need to receive this warning. Our legal system needs this spiritual insight. And you need to step into the role God has prepared for you in this cosmic battle between light and darkness. The warning has been delivered through my 8-minute journey beyond death. The choice is now yours. Share your thoughts below. What does this divine message mean for your life? How will you align yourself with divine love and truth starting today? Remember, love is the force that moves the universe. Let it move through you.